Think about the colleague who drains your energy the moment they open their mouth, the one who interrupts you, dismisses your ideas, turns every discussion into a power move. You try being polite, nothing changes. You try being firm, now you're difficult. So you stay quiet and quietly lose influence. Here's what most people get wrong. Influencing difficult colleagues is not about dominance, charm, or manipulation. It's about understanding how resistance works in the human brain. In this video, you'll learn how to influence difficult colleagues without playing dirty, without fake niceness, and without losing your self-respect, using ethical persuasion backed by psychology, negotiation research, and real workplace conversations. This isn't about winning arguments. It's about changing dynamics. If you've ever thought, why can't they just be reasonable? You're not alone. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Difficult colleagues are rarely difficult because they lack intelligence. They're difficult because they feel threatened, unheard, or out of control. Research in behavioral psychology shows that when people feel their status, autonomy, or competence is challenged, their brain shifts into a defensive mode. Logic takes a back seat. Self-protection takes over. This is why simply explaining yourself better almost never works. Adam Grant talks about this in his work on persuasion. People don't resist ideas. They resist feeling pushed. The moment someone senses pressure, their identity gets involved. And once identity is involved, facts alone won't move them. That's why difficult colleagues often interrupt instead of listening, dismiss ideas quickly, turn neutral conversations into power struggles, not because your idea is weak, but because agreement feels like losing. Now let's be clear about something important. This video is not about manipulating people into compliance. It's not about tricks, dominance, or pretending to be someone you're not. We're talking about ethical influence, influence that respects autonomy, reduces defensiveness, creates cooperation instead of silent resentment. Robert Cialdini's research makes this distinction clear. Ethical influence works with human psychology, not against it. And Chris Voss, former FBI negotiator, says something most workplaces still ignore. People don't want to be convinced. They want to be understood. That's the shift you're about to make. Before you learn what to say to difficult colleagues, you need to understand this foundation. Resistance is emotional before it's rational. Once you stop taking their behavior personally, you stop reacting and start influencing. And that's where the real power begins. Before you try to persuade a difficult colleague, you have to win a quieter battle, lowering their defensiveness. Most people do the opposite. They push harder. They explain more. They bring more data, and that backfires. Psychologists call this reactance, a mental reflex where people resist the moment they feel their freedom, status, or competence is threatened. Robert Cialdini identified this as one of the biggest reasons influence fails. When people feel controlled, they push back, even against ideas that benefit them. This is why difficult colleagues often oppose suggestions they later accept when someone else says the same thing. It's not the idea. It's how it made them feel. Chris Voss puts it bluntly. When people feel attacked, they stop listening, even if you're right. So the first principle of ethical influence is this. People can't collaborate while they're defending themselves. Your goal isn't to win the point. Your goal is to remove the emotional armor. Here's how that starts. Instead of leading with your opinion, you lead with tactical empathy. Not sympathy, not agreement, but demonstrating that you understand their position. Tactical empathy means clearly acknowledging how the situation looks or feels from their side, without judgment. For example, instead of saying, "You're not giving this idea a fair chance," you say, "It sounds like you're concerned this could slow things down." That one sentence does something powerful. It signals respect. It lowers status threat. It makes them feel seen instead of challenged. Adam Grant's research supports this. When people feel understood, they become more open to influence, even when they don't fully agree. This doesn't mean you're conceding. It means you're creating psychological safety. And here's the key insight most professionals miss. You don't earn influence by asserting authority. You earn it by reducing friction. Once defensiveness drops, persuasion becomes possible. And once persuasion becomes possible, difficult colleagues stop feeling impossible. When you deal with a difficult colleague, the first sentence matters more than the rest of the conversation combined. Say the wrong thing early, and everything after it sounds like an attack, even if it's reasonable. Chris Voss learned this the hard way in hostage negotiations. The fastest way to escalate resistance is to start with your position. That's why the most effective influence move is surprisingly simple. Start by naming their concern before stating your own. This is called labeling. Labeling means putting a neutral, non-judgmental name on what the other person might be thinking or feeling. One sentence. No exaggeration. No sarcasm. For example, instead of, "You're being really dismissive of this idea," you say, "It sounds like you're worried this could create extra work." Notice the difference. The first sentence challenges identity. The second reduces threat. Robert Cialdini's research on influence shows that when people feel accurately understood, they're more likely to engage cooperatively, even if they disagree. Their brain shifts from defense to evaluation. Here's another common mistake. People try to correct difficult colleagues too early. Instead of, "That's not what I meant," try, "It seems like I didn't explain that clearly." This does two things. It removes blame. It keeps the conversation open. Adam Grant often emphasizes this idea. Influence grows when you show intellectual humility, not weakness, clarity without ego. Now let's talk about mirroring, another simple but powerful tool. Mirroring means repeating the last few important words someone said as a question. If they say, "This approach feels risky," you respond, "Risky?" That's it. No argument, no explanation. Mirroring encourages them to expand, and when people explain themselves, they often soften their own position. Difficult colleagues resist being told what to think, but they're surprisingly willing to talk themselves into reason. And once they do, your influence increases without force, pressure, or manipulation. Let's put everything together in a situation you've probably lived through. Imagine you're in a meeting. You suggest a change. A difficult colleague immediately says, "That won't work." Most people react in one of two ways. They defend the idea aggressively, or they shut down and withdraw. Both options lose influence. Here's the ethical alternative. Instead of countering their objection, you start by lowering resistance. You say, "It sounds like you're concerned this could create complications we're not seeing yet." This is a label, neutral, respectful, and disarming. Now pause. If they feel understood, they'll usually respond with something like, "Exactly. We've tried things like this before." This is where most people jump in to correct them. Don't. Instead, you mirror. "Tried this before?" Now they explain. And as they explain, two things happen. Their emotional intensity drops. They feel ownership of the conversation. Chris Voss calls this letting the other side feel in control. Not because they are, but because perceived control reduces defensiveness. Only after that do you introduce your idea, but framed collaboratively. You say, "Would it be ridiculous to look at a version that avoids those past issues?" That's a calibrated question, an open-ended how or what question that invites cooperation without pressure. Notice what you didn't do. You didn't argue. You didn't assert dominance. You didn't manipulate. You guided the conversation. Robert Cialdini's research on commitment and consistency shows that when people help shape a solution, they're more likely to support it, because it becomes their idea too. And Adam Grant's work reinforces this. Influence sticks when people feel respected, not cornered. Here's the key takeaway from this part. Difficult colleagues soften when they feel safe, not when they feel defeated. Influence isn't about overpowering resistance. It's about absorbing it and redirecting it. Some colleagues don't argue openly. They use sarcasm. They talk over you. Or they agree in meetings and quietly block things later. These behaviors feel personal, but they're usually strategic. Psychologists describe this as indirect resistance, a way to maintain control without direct confrontation. And if you respond emotionally, you give them exactly what they want, proof that they can steer the interaction. The mistake most people make is trying to outperform dominance with dominance. That rarely works. Chris Voss teaches a counterintuitive rule. Never confront power head-on, redirect it. Let's start with sarcasm. If someone says, "Well, that's ambitious," don't defend, don't joke back. Instead, label the subtext. It sounds like you're unsure this is realistic. You're not accusing, you're clarifying. Sarcasm loses power when it's translated into plain language. Now let's talk about dominant interrupters, the people who cut you off mid-sentence. Instead of raising your voice or backing down, use a calm reset. Let me finish this thought, then I want your take. This works because it's assertive without aggression. Research on workplace communication shows that calm boundary setting increases perceived competence more than forceful pushback. Adam Grant often highlights this distinction. Confidence is quiet clarity, not volume. What about passive-aggressive colleagues? The ones who say, "Sure, whatever you think," and then resist later. Here, influence comes from making resistance visible. Gently. You might say, "It seems like there might be concerns we're not addressing yet." That sentence does two things. It invites honesty. It removes the need for covert resistance. Robert Cialdini's principle of consistency comes into play here. When people voice concerns openly, they're more likely to act in alignment with what they say later. The deeper pattern across all these behaviors is this. Difficult colleagues use indirect tactics when direct disagreement feels unsafe. Your job isn't to expose them. It's to make cooperation safer than resistance. That's ethical influence in action. One of the most frustrating situations at work is trying to influence someone who technically outranks you, or at least believes they do. You can't command them. You can't pressure them. And if you push too hard, you risk backlash. This is where most people feel powerless. But research consistently shows something surprising. Authority is only one source of influence, and often not the strongest. Robert Cialdini identifies authority as an influence principle, but he also emphasizes that perceived competence and credibility can outweigh titles in day-to-day interactions. Adam Grant's research backs this up. People gain influence not by asserting power, but by being seen as useful, fair, and aligned with shared goals. So how do you influence upward, ethically? You stop making requests about what you want and start framing around what they care about. Instead of, "I need approval for this approach," try, "How does this fit with the priorities you've been pushing this quarter?" That's a calibrated question. It invites collaboration without challenging authority. Chris Voss teaches that calibrated questions shift the work to the other person's brain. They start solving the problem with you, not evaluating you. Here's another example. Instead of saying, "I don't agree with that decision," you say, "What factors mattered most when that decision was made?" This does three things: shows respect, gathers information, opens space for influence later. Notice, you're not surrendering your position. You're earning the right to be heard. And here's the key mindset shift. When you lack authority, your leverage is clarity and alignment. People above you are overwhelmed. If you help them think more clearly, you become valuable. And value creates influence. The goal isn't to win immediately. It's to shape how decisions are made over time. That's how real influence compounds. A lot of people avoid setting boundaries at work because they confuse influence with appeasement. They think, if I push back, I'll lose goodwill. If I say no, I'll be labeled difficult. So they tolerate interruptions, extra work, disrespect disguised as urgency. And over time, influence erodes. Adam Grant's research makes an important distinction. Being agreeable is not the same as being respected. In fact, consistently saying yes often lowers perceived value because people associate respect with clarity and limits, not compliance. Here's the ethical way to set boundaries. You don't justify endlessly. You don't apologize excessively. You don't attack. You state the boundary and invite collaboration. For example, instead of, "Sorry, I'm really busy. I can't do this right now," you say, "I can take this on, but not by Friday. What timeline works on your end?" That's not defensive. That's grounded. Robert Cialdini's principle of commitment applies here. When people participate in setting boundaries, they're more likely to respect them. Now let's talk about interruptions. If someone cuts you off repeatedly, avoid sarcasm or silence. Use a calm reset. "Let me finish this point. Then I want to hear your view." This signals confidence without escalation. Chris Voss emphasizes that boundaries work best when they're delivered calmly, not emotionally. Emotional delivery sounds negotiable. Calm clarity sounds final. What about emotional pressure, guilt, urgency, or just this once? Instead of arguing, label it. "It sounds like this feels urgent." Then restate your boundary. "I can help next week, not today." No explanation spiral. No debate. The deeper principle is this. Boundaries protect influence. They don't reduce it. When people know where you stand, they stop testing. And when they stop testing, cooperation becomes easier. Influence isn't about being liked in every moment. It's about being trusted over time. At this point, you might be thinking, "This makes sense. But how do I remember all of this in the moment?" That's a fair concern. Influence fails when it feels like a list of tricks instead of a process. So here's a simple, repeatable framework you can run in your head anytime you're dealing with a difficult colleague. Think in 4 steps. Step 1. Regulate yourself. Before you try to influence anyone, you stabilize your own emotions. Difficult people trigger reactions. Reactions reduce influence. Neuroscience shows that when you're emotionally charged, your ability to read others accurately drops. Chris Voss stresses this constantly. The calmer person controls the conversation, so slow down. Lower your voice. Pause before responding. Step 2. Reduce their defensiveness. You start with tactical empathy. Label their concern. Mirror their key words. This signals respect and lowers threat. Example. "It sounds like you're worried about the impact on the team." No argument yet, just understanding. Step 3. Invite collaboration. Now you shift from statements to calibrated questions. Instead of pushing your solution, you ask, "How would you want to approach this?" This activates cooperation. People support what they help create. Robert Cialdini's research on commitment confirms this. Involvement breeds alignment. Step 4. State clear boundaries or proposals. Only after safety and collaboration do you assert your position. Calm, clear, specific. Example. "I can support this approach if we adjust the timeline." This isn't manipulation. It's structured influence. Adam Grant emphasizes that ethical persuasion respects autonomy while guiding better decisions. This framework does exactly that. Here's the key insight. You don't influence difficult colleagues by outplaying them. You influence them by outstructuring the interaction. Once you internalize this process, difficult people stop feeling intimidating. They become predictable. And predictability is power. Most influence failures don't come from bad intentions. They come from small, invisible mistakes that escalate resistance without you realizing it. Let's surface the biggest ones. Mistake 1. Over-explaining. When you sense resistance, you add more detail, more justification, more logic. But psychology shows the opposite effect. The more you explain, the more insecure you sound, and insecurity invites pushback. Adam Grant's research highlights that confident communicators say less, not more. Clarity beats volume. Mistake 2, trying to win too early. You rush to agreement. You correct. You debate. You prove. Chris Voss warns against this. Pushing for yes before psychological safety exists almost guarantees a no. Or worse, passive resistance. Influence is a sequence, not a sprint. Mistake 3, labeling the person instead of the behavior. Calling someone difficult, negative, or controlling, even internally, shapes how you respond. Once you label the person, you stop listening. Ethical influence requires curiosity, not judgment. Robert Cialdini emphasizes that persuasion collapses when respect disappears. Mistake 4, avoiding conflict completely. Silence feels safe, but silence teaches people how to treat you. Unspoken boundaries turn into resentment, and resentment leaks out in tone and body language. Adam Grant often notes that avoidance isn't kindness, it's delayed conflict. Mistake 5, matching their emotional energy. Raised voice, sarcasm, defensiveness. This feels natural and destroys leverage. The calmer person always has more influence. Always. Here's the reframe you need. Difficult colleagues aren't tests of your patience. They're tests of your structure. When you slow down, say less, and follow the framework, influence stops feeling exhausting. It becomes intentional. And that's the difference between reacting and leading. By now, you've learned the principles, the phrases, the framework, and the common mistakes to avoid. But here's the truth. Knowledge alone doesn't create influence. Influence is a practice-based skill, not a one-time action. Adam Grant often emphasizes that lasting influence grows from principled consistency. It's the daily choices you make in interactions, not the occasional, perfect conversation. Chris Voss reinforces this with his tactical approach. Influence compounds when you pause, listen, and respond intentionally, rather than reactively. So here's the mindset shift that separates those who struggle from those who succeed. People resist ideas, not you. Resistance is emotional first, rational second. Don't take it personally. Influence is ethical, not manipulative. Your goal is cooperation and understanding, not victory or control. Small, consistent actions matter more than dramatic moves. Every respectful correction, calibrated question, or boundary builds credibility. Now, let's turn all of this into an influence challenge you can start today. Step 1. Identify one difficult colleague you interact with regularly. Step 2. Pick a real situation this week where you normally feel frustrated or ignored. Step 3. Apply the framework. Regulate yourself. Reduce their defensiveness. Invite collaboration. State your boundary or proposal clearly. Step 4. Track the response. No judgment, just observation. Over time, you'll notice a pattern. People respond better when you remain calm, structured, and ethical. Here's the final reminder. Influence isn't about being louder or smarter. It's about being clearer, calmer, and more intentional. Robert Cialdini's research shows that influence sticks when people feel respected, involved, and understood. And that's exactly what this blueprint does. You're not trying to win in every conversation. You're building long-term credibility, respect, and collaboration, the kind of influence that lasts. If you found even one technique useful, give this video a like. Share in the comments a real situation, at work, with friends, or in relationships, where you want more influence.